We've had a number of people ask us about apps, so we put together this short little video to clear up what you need to know about apps. The word app, of course, is short for application, but when people talk about apps these days, they're specifically talking about applications for mobile phones and tablets. There are a couple of mobile operating systems available to developers for native mobile apps. Among others, we have Symbian from Nokia, BlackBerry OS from RIM, and Windows Mobile from Microsoft. But in the current marketplace, there are only two big dogs or elephants in the room. Those are iOS from Apple, which is by far the revenue leader, and Android from Google, which has the largest installed base. The only thing you need to know is that multiple operating systems exist. There are two ways to build apps, and if you go the first route, which is native, you are coding for a specific mobile operating system and possibly even a specific device. On the other hand, if you go the web app route, you're using open web standards to make an app that will work on almost any mobile device and any operating system. You may be thinking to yourself, why wouldn't people just use that option all the time? Well, let's get into that. With native apps, your app can work even if the user is not able to get on the internet. A native app is also able to write files to the device and read files from the device. If you want to do anything with 3D or something that's fairly processor intensive, a native app is the way to go because you have access to far more of the hardware. Not only that, you can get to lower level libraries and functions that are built into the operating system. Another advantage is that native apps tend to launch and load quickly. Of course, there are downsides. Coding for native apps is usually done in a lower level language, which means that there's a relatively smaller pool of developers depending on the platform or operating system you're targeting. Speaking of that, you'll need to have a separate code base for each operating system you want to target. Also, if you have data that updates all the time, the user is going to have to download it every time it's updated. This can be annoying if we're talking about large amounts of data that change a lot. Another downside is that it takes longer to get an app done natively compared to a web app. Okay, now let's see what the scoop is on these web apps. A big advantage is that web apps are developed using standard web languages that are well known. This is one of the reasons why web apps are generally faster to build than a similar native app. As mentioned earlier, because it's built on web standards, there's no need to build a separate app for each platform you're targeting. In addition, because the user is always grabbing the app through the browser, they're always getting the latest and greatest version and not having to download data that they don't necessarily need right away. Of course, web apps have their downsides too. For instance, you don't have access to low-level frameworks or the hardware. A huge downside for certain applications is that web apps will not run without the web. If you're not online, no app for you. In addition, you have little if any access to the local file system, so you can't save any files to the local device. This may be okay for certain applications, but certainly not all. So let's talk about when you would recommend one over the other. If your client needs 3D or something with serious processing power, a native app is the way to go. The same is true if you need access to the local file system or if you only want very specific people or even specific devices to access the app. The other reason you might want to go native is if you're targeting one specific device and you want to really milk every capability it has. Here's an example of a native app. It's called QuickWord, and it's part of the QuickOffice suite, which is a Microsoft Office compatible productivity suite for phones and tablets. It was initially designed and coded by one of the developers on our roster. For certain projects, web apps are the ticket. You would recommend a web app if your client needs to provide access to data that frequently changes. Also, if you need it cranked out fast, a web app is hard to beat, especially if the app doesn't need to be locked down. Many clients like to use apps as promotional tools, so this would be a good fit for that scenario. Web apps don't have low-level hardware access, but that does not mean you can't have a beautiful, rich user experience. Here's an app we built for a client who needed a custom calculator for a foreign currency exchange training site. It works on any device and has real-time data feeds that make it a great value add for the client's customers. So now you know a lot more than you did just a few minutes ago. If you have more questions, we're here to help. We build both native and web apps, and we'll be glad to talk to you about your next project.